Good afternoon, everyone. It's 4 o'clock. Thank you for being so diligent and waiting while we postponed until now so that all the sessions in the conference could be back on track together. Marcia, did you find an answer? Oh, she's not back yet. I was going to say she was going to find an answer for a question that was about bus schedules and things. But when she comes back in, Mike, would you let her know? We still want an answer to that? Yep. Thank you. Well, this is Foreign Schools Professional Judgment session. We kind of got a little segue going there when you were asking a couple of questions of Kevin and I. And we need to start our slideshow, Kevin. I think it's a touch screen, so you can just touch it. This is Professional Judgment, session number 42. And I am David Bartlett. I know I saw all of you this morning, bright and early, when they were still sipping on their first cup of coffee of the day, or tea, or whatever it might be. This is my colleague Kevin Campbell. He's going to be presenting with me as well. And we're going to tell you about the professional judgment and what it is. And we did notice in the schedule, when the original schedule was put out, that this session for some reason was a little shorter than the other sessions. But since we've been pushed back to the end of the day, I'm here in town. I don't have plans tonight. Anybody got plans tonight? I mean, we can go as long as we need to go. Oh, you got plans? Well, that's wonderful. My plan includes eating and sleeping. That's my plan. But we do have a few, yes, please, thank you. We do have a few disclaimers I want to start out, and these are just kind of some things to lay some framework for professional judgment. Some of the documentation requirements for professional judgment. The shuttles will be running until 5:30. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Okay. Let's see. I was just opening up with some disclaimers. Some of the items we're going to cover as far as professional judgment goes during this session, we have some things we just want to lay some framework and some groundwork. Some of the documentation requirements for the professional judgment are very open-ended. Okay. I know we've talked about professional judgment before. You've heard what it is. You know what it is. And does the department have the final say on the professional judgment? No, unless it's in a particular certain circumstances. There are sometimes when we've said, no, you cannot do that. Like some examples we're going to show in a minute or two, some things where we've said specifically this might be an area you would exercise professional judgment. Some of the documentation requirements for PJ, but that's the acronym for professional judgment, PJ. PJ means something different where I grew up. But cases are very specific. If you want to see documentation of a specific medical bill that proves, then that's the documentation you need to get from the student. That will satisfy your requirement, if that's what, and it's to your satisfaction. We're also going to go through some very exact procedures and also some very general concepts about professional judgment. Because like there are instances where you need to mark a particular box in FAA Access to CPS to mark that you have done a professional judgment. And we'll show you where that's at. And then, regardless of the situation, you want to look at these appeals that the students are asking you to make and thinking about helping the student, right? But also maintaining the integrity of the federal student aid program. Okay? You don't want to put yourself at jeopardy of losing eligibility because you've done a particular item that you may feel is not appropriate. Right? And lastly, we most certainly want to help the students. That's why the professional judgment rule is there. Remember, professional judgment is a special circumstance outside of the usual. Okay, it's a special case scenario. And if you go and look at some of the handbook references and such, you'll find a very clear statement. Professional judgment may not be used to circumvent the law or regulations. Okay? I actually had a financial aid person in training once say, I don't like that rule. I think it's stupid. So I'm going to do PJ for every student that applies to. I said, whoa, stop. You just crossed over a line. Now you're going to commit fraud. Okay, that's a whole different matter. All right? So, and yes, I had a nice conversation with that school. We explained how that worked. And they chose not to do it that way because they would be circumventing the law. Okay? Now that I've thoroughly scared everyone, let's go on with the presentation. This reference in the handbook was never meant for you to read on this slide. Just to know that in the Application and Verification Guide, AVG Chapter 5, you'll find this sidebar. And it is purely just a sidebar in the handbook. that describes what professional judgment is. And I want everybody to note, I know it's small, but it starts out with HEA section 479, big A, little a. That's the Higher Education Act of 1965 as amended, meaning that the Department of Education does not regulate on professional judgment because it's in the Higher Education Act and it also says we can't. Right? So that's where you'll find, that's the only place you're going to find it in the handbook or in the regulations. There are some different types of professional judgments that your institutions may choose to exercise. You might change a component of the expected family contribution calculation. Not the EFC itself, but you have to change a component of the calculation on the student's ICE or on FAA access, mark the flag, and then send that through. And then see what happens, how the EFC gets adjusted. Dependency overrides is another area of professional judgment. Cost of attendance modifications. Do you have costs that might, a certain particular student may have higher costs for some reason than another student? Can they document why they have those higher costs, etc.? That would be a change to the cost of attendance. Refusing or reducing a loan origination amount, that's a professional judgment call. And lastly, the last thing we're going to cover is when a parent refuses to complete the FAFSA and refuses to support the student. That's an and. Circle the word and if you printed the slides out. And is important here. Is everybody familiar with the 4 really important words when you read our text, our regulations, or our wording? And, or, may, and must. Those are the 4 really important ones. And also watch out for those pesky semicolons, because that could start a list. So be careful with that stuff, okay? But I can't really call that a word, so. So let's lay a little more groundwork, like we're not laying enough groundwork already, huh? You have to have policies and procedures in your policies and procedures manual that says whether or not you will exercise professional judgment. And it's going to include how they're going to be reviewed. Who's going to be considering these professional judgment? How you're going to document it. Not what documentation, but how. Okay? How you will communicate to the student whether or not their professional judgment was approved. Are you going to do paper? Are you going to send a letter? And then lastly, how are you going to finalize it? That this is our professional judgment decision. Here you go, student. And all of these things should be in your policies and procedures manual. The first one about reviewed, I always have to add that if you're going to do it by committee, if you're going to have 3 people involved or 2 people or just the financial aid director, put that in there of how it's going to be done to keep things fair so that it's very obvious how you're going to do this. Okay? Will you have a tribunal meet once a month? I don't know. I mean, that's how you choose to do it. A tribunal. You know, I have to throw the big words in from now and then, Kevin. Circle the words case by case on this first bullet. That is what matters on the first bullet. That these professional judgment decisions must be made on a case by case basis. And schools have had issues, and when they don't do case by case. You need to document the reason that you made the adjustment in the student's file. I did it again. I walked around the room, didn't I? He's waving at me, go back to the front. I wander around. You have to document it in the student's file with whatever documentation you deem satisfactory. Okay? I mentioned earlier a medical bill. Is that good enough? Do you want a third party to corroborate why that medical bill was incurred? Okay. I'm getting next to a speaker again. It must relate to the special circumstance. The documentation actually has to be appropriate. Okay. And that differentiates them from the rest of the class, rest of the students. And if there's any conflicting information that exists in the student record prior to the professional judgment, you have to resolve that first before making the professional judgment. Okay? Before you make the professional judgment. So changes to the EFC formulas. This graphic was just kind of meant to explain how you change one element of the EFC. And changing the one element will then move down through the calculation to actually change the EFC. For example, you can see the parent contribution. It depends on the retirement insurance, the investments, real estate, child assets and so on, that actually all builds into discretionary assets. And making a change to one of those will then change the parent contribution in the calculation. Has anyone here done an EFC calculation, an actual expected family contribution calculation? Yes. The two of you win prizes. Ready? Virtual candy. Okay. Virtual candy does not promote tooth decay. So I have a cousin who's a dentist. He tells me to do that. So a professional judgment that we're going to get in the first one I talked about on that list is recent income changes. I already mentioned you can't directly change the EFC. Well, I just think the EFC shouldn't be 5,000, it should be 3. You can't just do that. Okay, you have to change a component of the EFC and data element. And you can only make reasonable adjustments to the elements of that calculation, like AGI, taxes paid. Maybe the student did have some sort of extraordinary expense that was outside of the norm of what a special circumstance, a special expense that wouldn't have been made otherwise. Well, they had to use their income to pay that, right? Well, that could be an adjustment to the AGI because they don't have that income available to then be able to use that to pay for school, as an example. The best thing I can tell you to do is look at the FAFSA itself, the form they fill out, what those components are, because that gives you the list on that list of income items of what you might possibly be able to adjust. And also take a look at that EFC formula guide. If you haven't done that, if you haven't tried that out, because I know when I train on EFC during some of the fundamentals training I mentioned this morning, we have a lot of aha moments. Oh, that's how that makes the calculation change. That's why if this goes in on this column or this block, that's why it changes. Okay? So if you are considering an income change and allowing an income change, this is just an example of a few questions you might choose to ask the student or the parent. For instance, maybe they told you they lost their job. When did they lose their job? Did they lose their job during the year for which taxes were paid? Was it recent? When did it happen? Why? What was the income before they lost their job? And this is just an example of someone lost a job. How long were they there prior? And what's their income look like now? What's the income situation now? Was it one parent working, one parent not working? Now the parent that was working is no longer they don't have that income anymore, so therefore they're not going to be able to depend on that to be able to pay for school, because obviously that would change the AGI considerably, wouldn't it? Well, maybe that happened. A PJ question that crossed my desk, oh gosh, this has been a few years ago now, goodness. Well, they asked the family, Dad had lost his job, but Mom went out and tried to find work, found work almost immediately. So they asked for, can Mom show what it was? Turned out they wanted to do a PJ for him, so we're going to do the PJ. Get us the information, get the documentation. When they went out and did the PJ, turned out Mom was a CPA, an accountant. So Mom had more income than Dad did. That PJ didn't quite work out for him. Okay, but they found this out, so they had to fix it. Okay? So you're going to see this slide a lot as we go through this presentation because this is about documentation. You need to get a written explanation from the student or parent, what happened and how, what happened and why. Verbal explanation, how do you document a verbal explanation? Anybody? You write down the conversation, you take copious notes. It's still in your handwriting, it's not theirs. They had no part of it. What? Get a signature on it. And have them review it, get a signature and date on it. That's one, that could be an option. Have them hand them a pad of paper and say, can you write this down for me and give it to me? That could be another option. Maybe they'll send you an email. Get Mom and Dad to send you an email. Yeah, you're over here nodding. Yes, get an email. If it's necessary, obtain third-party documentation. If somebody lost a job, is there going to be paperwork about that? Probably. Did they file for unemployment? And again, make your decision on a case-by-case basis. Very important to always look at case-by-case basis. And document your decision in writing, including your narrative of why you made the decision. Okay? Because if we walk in, look at it, oh, there's a professional judgment on the file. Okay. So I mentioned earlier that you're going to have to make some adjustments in CPS. That way you'll be using FAA access to CPS online. You will need to code the ICER as a professional judgment so that only that change comes back to your institution. Okay? Because once you mark the PJ flag, or FAA adjustment flag, I think is what it's called. Once you mark that ICER only comes back to you now. Because the other school didn't make a professional judgment. Why would we send the ICER to the other schools? Okay? And then watch when that new ICER comes in, and that we will reflect the new adjustments. You now have the new ICER. You can now proceed with awarding the student. The next bullet is making disbursements. Well, once you've notified the student, you have to notify the student of their revised eligibility. That's part of the notification process that I mentioned earlier. Remember the policy and procedures? You have to notify them and make the disbursement to the student based upon the new amounts. And don't ever forget to report your disbursements and adjustment amounts to COD within 15 days. Okay? Here's a slide that kind of gives you the detail of this is what the ICER looks like before you actually make the professional judgment. I know it's small. I apologize for that. If you have it on your own screen, by all means, look at it closer. It says special circumstances flag not set. Then, of course, there's dependency override, there's professional judgment. And those are the three categories where you'll be marking if you're making these kind of case-by-case determinations. Then after you actually do make one, this is actually after you clicked on Make Corrections. You'll go in and actually select the box. And in this case, I'm entering in professional judgment EFC adjustment. So I'm actually going to mark that in the system. So now that's marked. And when you make that change then, change the income or whatever it might be, then it will get saved into the system once you click on Submit. So what about the transition to using early FAFSA and using the 2015 income for both 15-16 and 16-17? Well, we've been putting out a lot of electronic announcements. And I've actually included the citations to the electronic announcements and also GEN 1603 that talks about when using prior year. And what these letters talked about was, yes, we expect that there to be more professional judgment requests because can a student's income change in 2 years? Yeah, a student's income can change. A parent's income can change in 2 years. So we expect more professional judgments to cross your desk. We ask you to be open to those crossing your desk. We didn't say you had to approve them. We just said we're kind of giving you a heads up that they're going to be coming. And we have also let our program compliance offices know that they should expect to see more professional judgments at schools. Okay? And that's what those letters cover. Okay. Mr. Campbell?
Thanks, Dave. Dave just gave us a pretty good discussion there about changes in income levels and things that we might want to change as an act of professional judgment. But as one of his early slides showed, there were several different types of professional judgments we want to talk about today. And so I'm going to take the second one that was on that list, and that's a dependency override. Now, the Department of Education typically determines what the dependency status is of a student based on 13 questions that we ask on the FAFSA. 13 questions that we ask them in order for us to determine, is this a dependent student or is this an independent student? And it's not the dictionary definition of that word, dependent or independent. It's not the United States Internal Revenue Service, the taxing agency of the federal government. They have a different definition of what dependent and independent. This is our definition, the definition that we use. And basically what it comes down to is any yes answer to one of those 13 questions will render the student independent. That's what we're trying to get at. But some students have to answer all those questions with a no, making them dependent for federal student aid purposes. But there's extraordinary, unusual circumstances in that student's situation that might allow them to be made independent even though they answered no to all those questions. And that's where you come in. This would be an act of professional judgment where we're taking a dependent student and we're going to override that and we're going to make them independent. Why is that better? because we don't have to look at mom and dad's income. Mom and dad typically have more income than the student does, and a lot of times by making the student independent, it might make them a little more eligible for federal student aid than they would be otherwise. Now, financial aid administrators are allowed to do this dependency override one way only. You can only take a dependent student and make them independent. You can't take an independent student and make them dependent, even if it's a 40-year-old guy who moves back home with mom and dad. Can't do that. That student would be independent by virtue of age in that scenario. Now, like all professional judgment, and we're going to say this in each one of the ones we talk about, you have to do these case by case. What do we mean when we say that? You look at each case individually. You don't have a policy that you follow that, given this set of circumstances, we just always do it automatically. Dependency overrides and all types of professional judgment should never be linked to the word automatic. You do these on a case-by-case basis, looking at each individual case, weighing the merits, and making your decision, and documenting the decision you made. Our second bullet here talks about one of the acts that you must perform here if you determine that an override is appropriate, which sometimes you will and sometimes you won't. But if you determine that it's appropriate, you write a statement that determines that states how you came to that determination and documenting the decision that you're going to make. Include the documentation that the student presents to you that documents their situation that's leading you to make this decision in their favor. The best type of written statement that you can get is a narrative, meaning you tell a story, so that when an auditor or a program review comes and looks at this decision at a later time, and sometimes it can be years later, they just read the story that you wrote. This is what happened. The student said this. The student had this documentation. The student claimed this. I reviewed it. I did this. I performed this action. I am this person. Sign. I did it on this date. That way, someone can read that 2 years later and know exactly what you did, as opposed to someone else who just collects a bunch of documents. I've seen that. I've seen student files where the person just collected a bunch of documents that the student presented to them. They said, okay, I got the documents, I put them in the student's file, I do the dependency override. I said, what do the documents say? I don't know. They say what they say. Read them. I had someone tell me that once. I said, I don't have to read them. You have to read them, and then you have to write about what they say. So they were not understanding the documentation rule. They were collecting documents, not necessarily looking at what they said. Do they substantiate what the student has told us verbally? Yes. Well, we still might have questions of the student in order to make this extraordinary decision. Now, in most areas of professional judgment, we don't say what you can't do. But in dependency overrides, we've established certain things that do not rise to the level of having you be able to consider that this student is independent. And these are what they are. The parent's refusal to contribute to the student's education. Mom and dad just say, I'm not going to give any money to this dependent student. Your assessment of that situation can never lead to, well, then I'll do a dependency override. Parents aren't contributing. That is not sufficient. That is not extraordinary. One does not have to look any further than my parents to find an example of parents who did this. This is not an extraordinary situation in a student's life. Therefore, it's not a reason to make a student independent. The parent's unwillingness to give information on the FAFSA. They won't complete the FAFSA, or one of them won't complete the FAFSA. That's not a reason to then say, we'll make this student independent. The parent will often make this claim. I'm not claiming the student on my tax return that I sent into the Internal Revenue Service of the United States government. Great, we don't care. This is not a reason to make the student independent. And then probably the most common thing I think schools encounter is a student who says, I'm totally self-sufficient. I'm not reliant upon my parents' money or their income. I have my own place to live. I pay my own bills. I live life as an independent person. Terrific. So did I. Doesn't matter. It's not rise to the level of being extraordinary and to make this student be independent. Now, unusual circumstances is a limitless phrase. It can include anything. It's why we leave it for you to judge instead of us. We asked 13 questions. We're not going to ask another 100 trying to get at these extremely unusual situations that could result in the student being independent. They include abandonment by the parents. We're not going to ask that on the FAFSA. Have your parents abandoned you? Or is your family situation abusive? That happens. This would be the student sharing this kind of private information with you in order for you to hopefully make a determination for them. Sometimes the student simply doesn't know where either parent is. These are things that you would consider. I'm not saying these would be automatic. Remember, professional judgment is never automatic. These would be things that you would consider. These are not on the other list where these are just not things that are extraordinary. These are extraordinary and things that could be taken into consideration as you make your decision of whether to make the student be independent or not. If you're saying, yes, this is so, I can get the documents that say this is so, then document the situation carefully and thoroughly, make the student independent, treat the student as independent for federal student aid purposes. Your documentation has to tell that story I was referencing before. It has to support your decision, has to be connected to the decision that you're making. It has to include the reason that you're making this decision. And in almost all cases, you want to involve a third party to provide some sort of attestation, some sort of documentation that what the student is telling you is true. This can be any number of people, a counselor, a doctor, a clergy person, a lawyer, a court. Typically, you might not be talking to these individuals individually, but receiving some sort of document from them that substantiates what we've already been told by the student. In limited cases, there might just be a situation where it's simply impossible to get documentation from a third party that documents what the student is telling us. And we wouldn't say there, then you just automatically cannot move forward. You might choose not to move forward, meaning that you have some perhaps doubt about what the student is telling you their situation is. But if you do not have that doubt and you simply cannot get any third party documentation, meaning that you've tried and have been simply unable to find a third party that is willing to attest to the student's situation, it is acceptable to get a signed and dated student from the student or a student family member in the student's family that details the unusual circumstances. This is a Dear Colleague letter that we published many years ago, Gen 0307. The 03 tells us it was published in 2003. This is available in IFAP. You have to click on the archive because of the age of the letter. We only put the 3 most recent years on the main part of the IFAP Dear Colleague letter section, but there's a link right there that says archive, and it'll take you to old years. This is a letter I would recommend that you go and read when you return to your schools. Gen 0307 goes into quite a bit of detail about performing a dependency override. The bottom line of what this long text on our screen says is that carefully document your decision. We can't say that word enough when we're talking about professional judgment. You have to document what you did, how you did it, why you did it, what the story was, why you thought this decision was the right one, who you are, and when you did it. Tells a story. Here's an example. We've got a student, and her name is Katie, and she has requested a dependency override because she's been working and living on her own during her gap year as a scuba instructor in the British Virgin Islands. There she is in her scuba gear. She's had very little contact with her family during this time because she chose to disobey her family's wishes to become a theoretical physicist. And instead, she wants to be a marine biologist, during which time she can use some of this scuba gear. She's provided pay statements for herself. She's shown that she has paid her own rent and she's paid her own utility bills for the past year. Her father has indicated that she is willfully independent and he doesn't understand her wishes to become a biologist, but he's willing to assist with her college financing if needed. What do you think? We're going to make Katie an independent student? No. Katie has shown self-sufficiency here in saying I'm a self-sufficient individual and I should be independent because of that. It says she's had very little contact with her family. That's not the same thing of being estranged from one's family, where there's no contact due to some usually horrible situation. She's living in the British Virgin Islands and mom and dad are back home in the States. That's what her situation is. So this doesn't really rise to the occasion of a dependency override. Here's an FSA access to CPS online screen. This is a place you would go if you were going to do the dependency override to tell us that you're taking a dependent student, you've already done all the work and analysis, but now you are in fact making the student be independent. This is required. If you don't make the student be independent in the system, and then you give the student independent loan limits, it'll reject or look funny to us. So this is where you would go, FSA access. There's a place there with a drop-down box where you're going to say yes or no that you're doing the dependency override, making a dependent student independent for federal student aid purposes. Here's our screen that Dave mentioned. We'll have one of these for each type of professional judgment we talk about. This is our recommendation. Nowhere in the regulations does it say this is how documentation must be collected. But we know what looks right, and we know what looks lacking. This is what looks right. You obtain a written dependency override request. It's not a requirement, but it's a good idea. Have that as part of your documentation that they are in fact requesting this. Refuse verbal explanations. Verbal explanations, they're right here, and that means nothing for an auditor or a program reviewer. You want to get multiple third-party documentation if you can. You always want to get other people to say what the student is saying is correct, not just that the student is saying it. The student has a vested interest in saying it, so we might not be exactly getting 100% truth. I know that probably rarely happens, but it could. You have to make the decision case by case, and you have to document your decision with a narrative. And I say you have to. Again, this is our recommendation for what good documentation would look like. Dave, we talked a lot about changes to cost of attendance before we started the presentation. We must be going to talk about it again, huh?
And Mike talked about it a little while ago, right? I think the session before this was about cost of attendance. Well, we're not going to get into the actual components, but this is just this illustration of what goes into the cost of attendance. Tuition, fees, room and board, books and supplies, transportation, and personal expenses. Just kind of some examples, and I know they were very eloquent in their presentation earlier to cover all of these items. But a professional judgment that's probably going to cross your desk is, hey, I have an exceptional circumstance why I need a professional judgment because my cost is higher than the other student. Most likely they're going to ask you to adjust the tuition and fees, room and board, books and these are the cost of attendance items. But other costs that are applicable. There was a question earlier about, well, what about dependent care? Well, could dependent care be a different cost in the UK versus Australia? Sure, but if someone still has a dependent, they have those dependent costs, whether they, are wherever they are. But an example might be if their dependent, their child has to be in school, but they can't do a public education because they're not a citizen of that country, then that's going to be extraordinarily high cost, perhaps. Could that something you could get documentation on? We go back to that rule. Can you document it? Can you prove it? Do you feel it's appropriate? Okay. We're going to talk about those in just a moment, but these are just examples. So as part of professional judgment, you can indeed adjust their cost of attendance component. Now, remember, this adjustment can be either up or down. It could increase the value attached to that component. Usually it is an increase because they're saying, hey, I have this special circumstance that I must have that particular access or whatever it might be. Again, like we told you before, it has to be documented. Okay? I think this is the one slide that doesn't show case by case. Of course, it has to be a case by case basis. And the typical result in that increase in the cost of attendance is sometimes an increase in need. Depends on the cost of your institution and your cost of attendance. It could already be really high. Will changing the cost of attendance by $1,000 change their amount of need? Maybe not. Maybe it will. That's your institution's determination to find out how that might actually work. Remember, cost of attendance is always COA minus, and that should say, EFC equals need. Okay. So we have an example in our materials. Our example is our friend Hector, who after Hector has chosen to attend a foreign institution. He's a U.S. citizen. He attends Fredonia College, and this is something that we made up. This is completely made up. Okay.
It is?
Well, it could be a figment from some other previous point. And Fredonia College requires that all students live in institutional housing. Right? Anybody have a requirement, a residency requirement or something like that? No? Yes, I see a few hands going up and down, yeah. That was really just to see if everybody was still awake, moving your hands up and down. We'll start the jazzercise after the session. The room and board component in the cost of attendance at Fredonia College is 24,000 quatlus, which is the official currency of Fredonia, and which is equal to approximately 10,000 United States dollars, of which 5,000 is for housing, the other half is for meals and expenses, board. Hector, however, finds out that he's allergic to the paint in the residence halls. All right? And it's on every single wall in the residence hall. So Hector goes and finds this out, and that's what's actually causing him to be ill. So Hector finds an apartment off campus, finds out how much it's going to cost for the year. He also does a little more research and finds out how much groceries are going to cost, right? Because Hector still has to eat, right? And he finds out that's the cost, there's the cost it's going to be, as opposed to actually eating in the cafeteria. So Hector goes to the institution and does an official request to be allowed to live off campus. That request is granted. Now notice what it says there. That is not a professional judgment. They didn't grant professional judgment. The college just said it's okay for you to live off campus. So Hector then comes to you in the financial aid office and says, hey, I've been granted a request to live off campus because I have this need because the residence hall's paints make me sick. Hector provides you with a signed statement from the allergist saying he is indeed allergic to the paint. He has a copy of a lease showing the new cost. He has a document showing the projected cost for food for the year. So now the question becomes, what is the correct thing for Fredonia College to do? Take a look at those three items and decide which one, and I'm going to do a show of hands here when we get that. People are looking at me and going,
Where's 4?
that is a good point. We did talk about that. So, how many hands for number 1? Okay, we got 2 hands. I thought I saw another one pop up and then went back because they're not sure. Since nobody else said it, they can't be right? Consensus and all that. Number 2. My hands for number 2. Right, got a few more hands popped up on that. How many on number 3? Whoa.
Overwhelming.
Okay, those of you who put your hands up for 1 and 2, you're not wrong. Okay, those of you who put your hands up for 3, that doesn't mean you're right either. All right? Because it's professional judgment. From what you have and the information you have, you looked at it. And so change Hector's room and board to that cost of attendance, and boom, you're done if that's you said number 2. Number 3, change Hector's room and board to the equivalent of $12,000 because the school doesn't think it's that expensive. I don't agree with that. And when Kevin and I were talking this over, I made the comment, what if the school says, Hector, you know what, the paint in the residence hall make you sick, but not in the cafeteria. So you're going to stay on the cafeteria meal plan, but we're only going to approve part of it. Can you do that? You betcha. It's a professional judgment. Okay? And like Kevin said, where's number 4? Where's number 5? Number 6? That's a professional judgment. You have to make that professional judgment. Gosh, there's that slide again. Okay? Obtain that written request. Again, like Kevin said, is this required? No, but how do you know the student initiated the cost of attendance request without having some way? Verbal documentation, again, like Kevin said, I once had a financial aid administrator one time when I said, I went into their school, I was talking to them, I said I wanted to see the copy of their policies and procedures manual. Okay? And the woman got very defensive. Why? Just because I've never seen one and I'm on your campus and I want to see one. She's like, well, everything I need to know and my staff needs to know is right up here. You know, and so how did anybody else on the staff know unless they asked? Right? How will anybody else know if you make a professional judgment but don't document anything? So verbal documentation is, you know, document the interview you had with the student, or that's something that substantiates the student's claim. Hector had a copy of a lease. Hector had all this documentation. Hector most definitely had his ducks in a row that he was able to say, here's what I need to do to get ready for this. Case-by-case basis, again. Always make the decision on a case-by-case basis. And then, like Kevin said, document what you did, why you did it. We used to have something called the reasonable person test. Could a reasonable person walking off the street understand your documentation and your narrative to be able to understand why you made the decision you made? I'd like to take that one step further. Would a reasonable auditor or program reviewer see how you made that decision? They may not have to agree with it, but can they understand why you made it, how you came to that realization? That's the narrative part. So, Mr. Kevin?
Thanks, Dave. Most of the incidents of professional judgment we're talking about today are going to result in the student being able to borrow more money in the direct loan program. That's sort of the whole idea of doing the professional judgment. We're making the student more eligible than what they would have been otherwise. This particular type of professional judgment is the opposite. We're making the student less eligible than they would be. So this professional judgment is going the opposite direction, if you will. So here we're talking about a direct loan refusal. The school has refused to originate a direct loan for a student when the student is eligible to get a direct loan. Or they're saying, we're going to originate the direct loan for a lesser amount than you are eligible for. The student is typically eligible for whatever they're eligible for, based on what year of study they're in, whether they're dependent or independent, what their cost of attendance is, what their need is if we're talking about subsidized direct loans. You don't get to reduce that number just automatically. I have been to schools in the past where I've visited and they'll say, well, we charge the student $1,773 and so that's what we let them borrow. No, you can't do that. That's not the amount the student's eligible for. They were eligible for $5,500. Well, they didn't need it. Well, yes, they did need it because the loan is not just to make sure that your tuition gets paid. It's to pay for room and board and transportation, books and supplies, other things. So that's why typically you can't reduce the amount of the loan. The student is eligible for what they're eligible for. They can say, I want less. That's not a problem. We encourage that. But this is a professional judgment, meaning it's an exception to the normal rule. So on a case-by-case basis, as all PJ is done, you can refuse to originate a direct loan entirely, or you can originate it for a lesser amount. This is the authority where this gives you the right to do it. It's both in the law, the Higher Education Act, that's the part of the law where it talks about this. It's in the regulations, the Congress of the United States writes laws, the Department of Education writes regulations, and it's in a Dear Colleague letter back in 2011, again in the archive because of the age of the letter, Dear Colleague letter Gen 1107. All of these three are available in IFAP. So here's what you have to do if you decide to go down this route. You have to ensure that these decisions are made on a case-by-case basis. Why? Because it's an act of PJ. They're all done case-by-case. And it doesn't constitute any pattern or a practice that discriminates against the individual based on their race, their sex, their color, their income, their religion, their national origin, their age, or their disability status. These can't be why you would be reducing the amount of the direct loan. When you make this decision not to originate a loan, or you make the decision that you're going to reduce the amount that the student would otherwise be able to borrow, you have to document. I guess you're not surprised to hear us say that word. You have to document the reasons and provide an explanation of what you've done to the student in writing. We're denying them eligibility, so we're going to tell them why we're doing this, and we're going to tell them in writing. Here's what you can't do in this category. You can't limit the borrowing by students or parents, if we're talking about a Parent Plus loan, on an across-the-board or categorical basis. What do we mean by that? We can't say that everyone at our school can only borrow up to this amount of money, just the way we feel about it. Can't do that. You can't say, well, if you're in this program of study, we're going to have everyone in that program of study borrow less, but everybody else can borrow the max. Can't do that. Those aren't case by case. You're setting up a class of individuals, and you're going to treat them in some way that the regulations do not allow. The second bullet is what I was talking about a minute ago. You can't engage in a practice of doing direct loans only for what you are owed. You can't say, well, the student owes us this amount of money. That's going to be the limit of what we'll let them borrow. The direct loan program is not just to pay tuition. It's to pay all those other things in cost of attendance as well. And you can't limit the unsubsidized portion of a direct loan to independent students. You can't tell an independent student, well, you have this extra unsub money, but we're not going to let you borrow it or borrow all of it unless you're going in and doing this on a case-by-case basis. We have an example, Samantha. She's attending the International Academy of Arts in Spinberg. It's a mid-sized city in Fredonia. Samantha is talking to the direct loan administrator at the Academy about financial aid for the upcoming year, and she wants to know, what grants can I get? I want grants because I don't have to pay them back. So here's the direct loan administrator and Samantha. They're talking, and he's explaining to her that since Samantha is attending a foreign school, she's in Fredonia, she can only be eligible for direct loans, no grants from the federal government. Samantha says, you can't be serious. She then says, well, go ahead, max out the loans, because they're like grants to me anyway. I have no intention of ever paying these back anyway. So John's the direct loan administrator. He calls in a colleague. Her name is Scarlett. Here's Scarlett. John asks Samantha to repeat her statement about her intentions about not paying her loans, which she does enthusiastically. I ain't paying. John decides as an act of professional judgment that he will not originate a direct loan for Samantha. His reason is that Samantha has indicated that she has no intention of repaying the direct loan, and the operative word in that sentence is loan. They have to be repaid with interest. John documents the file, noting that Samantha made the statement twice, and once was in front of a witness, Scarlett. A witness is not required for this, but it's just always better to have a witness. If you can get Scarlett Johansson, that's even better. John shares his reason for refusing to originate the direct loan with Samantha, as he's required to do. He gives her the decision and the reason in writing. Samantha now states, John, I was just kidding. What should John do? Should he now originate the loan for Samantha, who thinks that he should, since she's kidding? Or should he go forward with his decision and say, Samantha, I don't think you're going to pay the loan back, so I'm not going to originate the loan. Who thinks that? I have 4 people that think that, and no one else has an opinion. I'm not going to say what the right answer is. I would say I wouldn't want to be fooled twice on this, but it would be up to you as an act of professional judgment of what to do at this point. Here's our slide. We see this again and again. The school may refuse to originate a direct loan for an otherwise eligible student or originate a loan for less than what we would think of that student could normally borrow. You have to do this on a case-by-case basis. You have to document your decision with a narrative. Tell the story of what's happening here and why you took the action you did. Remember, the reason cannot be discriminatory. In this type of professional judgment, we give the student our decision in writing and the reason for why we came to that decision in writing. David, looks like this is something about parents refusing to complete the FAFSA.
Yeah, and that is different than refusal to originate a lesser loan or no loan at all. So now, circle both the words and the word then. You're going to see this slide multiple times as well. Because in parent refusal to support and complete the FAFSA, it's both. Parent refuses to provide support and they refuse to put any data on the FAFSA. So then, at that point, the school can then do a professional judgment. Remember I mentioned those 4 words that are really important, and, or, may, and must? That's what you want to look for. There's the and, all right? Way back when I did computer programming classes, we always look for if-then statements. Anybody do computer stuff? No. Some people at least understand, all right. So, parent refuses to complete the FAFSA. They said, nope, I'm not going to complete the FAFSA. Parent never completes any part of the FAFSA. Okay? That means absolutely not, I will not fill it out for any reason. Okay? So that means then that the parent can't complete it, send it in, submit it, and then say, nope, you know what, I really shouldn't have done that. No, it's too late now. That's irrevocable, it's too late. So again, here's that part. They refuse to complete the FAFSA, so we've established that. And then the parent refuses to provide support to their dependent student. And it's dependent based upon the Department of Education's definition, not the IRS or anybody else. Then the school, as a professional judgment, can award and disperse unsubsidized direct loans only. Only unsub direct loans. That's all that the student is eligible for because they can't get parental data. And the parent refuses. So since the parent refuses to support the dependent student, and how do you prove the parent doesn't support the student in any way? Well, look to see maybe, is there some support? Anybody here been on a family cell phone plan? That's the one that I actually have. One school in my region does that specifically. Are you on mom and dad's cell phone plan? And they say yes. Then they're providing support. No, we won't do a PJ. The other question they ask, they actually have a form for this particular scenario. The other, how do you have health insurance? Oh, I'm on mom and dad's plan. Nope, they're providing support. They might refuse to fill out the FAFSA, but they're providing support. So go have them fill out the FAFSA. And auto insurance, auto maintenance, etc. Those examples. I mean, I know Kevin and we talked about this a lot. Those are ones we've actually heard of that schools are looking for. Okay. Parent refuses to complete the FAFSA and refuses. So as I said, the school as a professional judgment can award and disperse unsubsidized direct loans, and that's all. So, how do you document that? How do you find this out? Well, you're going to do that professional judgment. If you're choosing to exercise this, you need to have documentation. Hopefully, the parents will give you that documentation. That's the ideal. Okay, the parents say, nope, absolutely not. I'm not filling out the FAFSA. I'm not paying for anything. I'm not supporting them in any way. Well, if a parent really is that adamant about it, do you think they're going to be willing to document that? Probably so. Now, depending on the relationship that the student has with the parent, they may not actually have that ability to get that information. But is there a third party that can give you this information? Perhaps the student has sought counseling. Perhaps the student has been in touch with their clergy. And the clergy can provide that kind of documentation. I mean, this is just an idea, just an example of who you might be able to get that third-party documentation from. Someone who knows the student's situation and says, yes, that parent absolutely refuses to provide this documentation. That third bullet, the student's declaration alone is not acceptable. That's not enough. And the documentation must include the date that the support ended. Was it because they chose to go to the college in Fredonia? Well, maybe that's where it was. Maybe that's why they chose. Yes?
We can't, it's not recorded, Dave.
Oh.
Do it at the mic.
Got it. Okay, here, hang on. Let me hand you a mic. All right. I don't think it's going through the mic. Can you, oh, handhelds? Let me grab the one in the middle. Maybe that'll be the one that's turned on. Number 6. I'll just use number 4 here. Hang on, I'll hand it to you. There you go.
When you say award unsubsidized loans only, does it mean if the student was in year 1, dependent student, give them $5,500 unsubsidized?
Yeah, it's only the unsubsidized for whatever grade level they would be, right, Kevin? It's only that grade level. It doesn't mean you can then, like on some of, like when their parents is denied a plus, it's not like that.
Okay,
It's just whatever grade level they are and the unsub annual amount they can receive. Right.
thank you.
Thank you. So the student, as I mentioned, may receive, if the school agrees, the school does the professional judgment, they can get that unsubsidized limit up to the limit for which the student is eligible. Grade level 1 will be $5,500 and so on. This is the only federal student aid funds that the student is going to qualify for. That's it. Of course, in foreign schools, loans are the only thing they have the option for. And if the parents are refusing to support and refusing to fill out the FAFSA, are the parents going to take out a plus loan? Really? Honestly? No. They're not going to take out a plus loan. The FAFSA is going to be sent in. The student has to send in that FAFSA without any parental data. It's going to get rejected. Your institution is going to document the situation in your student files, document that they're not filling it out, and then you'll go ahead and award the unsubsidized loan. That's how you're going to do that part. That's how the functionality of it. Whether you choose to award the professional judgment or not, that's the functional part. That's the operational side of it.
I'm just trying to get clarification. So this is dependency override.
No, this is not dependency override.
Okay.
This is not a dependency
Okay.
override. This is the parent refuses to provide support
Okay.
and refuses to fill out the
But-
FAFSA.
But just on a different thing, just clarifying something.
Yeah.
So if in case I had a student whose parents applied for the plus loans, both parents, and they were both rejected. So
That's not a dependency override either. That's you're able to award additional unsubsidized
additional
aid
amount to the
Right.
limit
up
of,
to for the independent. Right. That's not.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's that's correct.
but that's
not,
fine.
Yeah. That would be fine. That's not a PJ. That's just they were both denied.
Yeah, there's legislation.
Right. Yeah. There's that. Yeah. That's lots of documentation on that one. That's not a PJ though. Right. Wait. Was I finished with the slide? Let me check. Yeah. Yes. Look at that. That was a perfect segue. Ready? Virtual candy. Well, look what the slide says. Not a dependency override. Nor does it qualify just by itself as a dependency override. And don't forget it's both. It's refusal and of both refusal to support and refusal to fill out the FAFSA. So we did an example with everybody else. Let's do an example on this one, right? Maria is a 19-year-old student about to start her second year of the university. She attended New York University her first year. She decides to transfer to International Polytechnic Institute. Fills out her portion of the FAFSA. Maria's mother completes the parental data on the FAFSA. It's submitted. FAFSA has been processed. You have an ICER for the student. But Maria's dad finds out that she's going to study abroad. The face in that picture, do you think he's happy about the situation? No, he is not. He is furious with her decision to attend IPI. Dad refuses to assist Maria in any way, says no, absolutely not. Cuts her off financially, ends all support, removes her from every insurance policy they have, and can International Polytechnic Institute do a PJ for Maria? Yes. Where's my hands for yes? Where's my hands for no? Okay, this is one where I can actually give you an answer on. No, because mom filled out the FAFSA. It's already been done. It's too late now. Parent refusal to support and fill out the FAFSA. Dad refuses. Mom still filled it out. Okay, mom still filled it out. That means mom Even dad may not know, dad may not be willing to support, mom's willing to support. Okay? So it's got to be both. Refusal to submit data on the FAFSA and refusal to support. It's both. So, yeah.
But bottom line, what is the difference between an override and a parent's refusal? Because the override is a parent's refusal to contribute to the student's education. So what is the difference between both? Sorry.
The difference between, I'm thinking you're asking the difference between unwilling to fill out the FAFSA and also unwilling to provide support. It's got to be both of those. It can't be one or the other. It has to be, like in this instance, mom was willing to fill out the FAFSA. Mom filled out the FAFSA. Therefore, mom's willing to provide support, but dad's not. And once the FAFSA is already filled out, it's done. They can't unfill out the FAFSA. Okay. But what if the parents aren't together? Well, then, apparently, if the parents aren't together, why would dad's information be on the FAFSA if Maria's living with mom? But that's another scenario. We'll talk about that one. I want to make sure I answer your question first, okay? The refusal to complete the FAFSA, that's one piece of this, doing the additional unsubsidized aid, making the student eligible for unsubsidized aid in this manner. The other part is refusing to provide any support. They say, no, I will not provide any financial support of any kind or any support at all. And it's got to be both in this scenario, where we're going to make them eligible for unsub only. Okay? Now let's get back, where was the question about that other question? No, what if, well, go ahead. Maria, thank you so much, Marcia, for being our microphone person.
It was just if the parents weren't living together.
What if the parents aren't living together? Is there a situation on the FAFSA that should have been reported differently?
Yes.
Then that's probably where I would start if that was the situation. Where if mom and dad aren't living together, they're separated, well, then however the FAFSA was filled out, perhaps that's the case. I don't know. But I really don't want to jump into a whole bunch of what-if scenarios until we finish the presentation, if that's okay. Right? What-if scenarios on PJ could go on forever. And it's really interesting to talk about PJ scenarios that have crossed your desk. I've only got a couple more slides. I think we're okay. So I do like our graphic here that Kevin came up with. Yeah, I'm cutting you off, but I still love you. So, hey, there's that last slide, right? There's that slide you've been seeing over and over and over. Parent must refuse to complete the FAFSA and refuse to provide support. Your decision is always case by case. And again, this is whether or not you're going to award the unsubsidized aid. And you need to document it in your system. Like it says here, a narrative written by you, the explanation by the student or some third party, and how you're going to write that, how you're going to keep track of it all. And something I'm going to add on to this, that most likely for Maria's situation will not change from one year to the next. That does not mean that you can automatically do this the next year. Okay, Maria would need to come back into you again and say, yep, dad's still mad. Okay, this time mom's not going to fill out the FAFSA. Okay, maybe that's the new scenario. All right, so has the situation changed? Or could there have been a reconciliation? I don't know. You don't know. But we can't just make that determination automatically for the next year Maria attends your institution. Okay. So, continuing on with the documentation a little bit more. It needs to include the parent statement if you can get it, when the support stopped, and can't be self-certified. You can't just take Joe's student's word for it. Okay? Or Joe's student says, nope, mom and dad cut me off. You know. Maybe mom and dad didn't agree with Joe's student's choice of lifestyle, but mom and dad still send him a check every week. Okay? So, Kevin and I created a few slides about resources for professional judgment. Of course, like I mentioned, it's in the Higher Education Act. You can see there's in the Federal Student Handbook. There's all the citations about refusal to award a direct loan or reduce a direct loan. Lots of places where we've talked about that in the past. And like Kevin said, when you go to the GEN section, the Dear Colleague letters, in little teeny tiny print up at the very top, it says archive. Old letters are found in the archive. Click on that, all the other years are open. And then PJ and unemployment, we did have Dear Colleague letters in 2009 and 2011 that described unemployment circumstances. that we believe would be acceptable reasons to do professional judgment. And if you read those letters, nowhere in there did we tell you you do it. We said might be reasonable reasons why you might choose to make a professional judgment. Now let's open the floor up for questions. Knowing it's 5 minutes after 5 and the buses stop running at 5:30.
That's what I was just
I
going
was
to
going to
say.
say, let's make sure we keep that in
So we
mind.
have a few minutes that we could entertain some
let's
questions
entertain
at
some
the
questions.
microphone here.
And I believe Marcia also has a mic that she is willing to.
Sorry, falling asleep there on the job, David.
Marcia is ready to warm up by moving around. This room's a little chilly.
Anybody have a question?
Yes.
I just had a question. I had a student, he requested for student loans, and we can tell he will be on our default later, because to see he come to the college and with his outlook, I don't want to say so bad to him, but we see we had some doubt, and I do some adjustment. Like I want to ask him to see what is your educational plan. So I see that, and he said, "Yeah, I want to pursue this program." That's what we can do to do. I cannot refuse to certify his loan, and after the first semester, we certify his loans, and he in jail. So that's why I say, how can we prevent that? We already see it, but we cannot do anything else.
He's in jail now, or he was in jail at the time you wanted to give him the loan?
He in jail after the time we give out the loans, in the middle of semester. So my college, she told me before, but say, what can we do? We asked him the educational plan. We want to give people a chance to finish their program, to get better for their skill or something. But that's why I say, thank you.
Are you asking us, or are you were just relating the story?
Yeah, I relate story, but I want to ask you because we see that. And then we see that's what it is, and we do the educational plan. So we try to prevent, but we cannot do anything else because we say we cannot refuse a loan when the student had a right to ask, right?
What do you want to do?
I don't know.
I'm not hearing anything that you're describing to me that would indicate that we could refuse to originate the loan for the student at the time you were originating the loan. Yes, I'm hearing you say he went to jail later, but was he going to jail at the time he was going to school? I don't think so.
Isn't it?
Yeah, after we gave him the second disbursement, and he went to jail.
But I'm hearing you ask, should I have not originated the loan back in the beginning?
Yes,
And what would you have based that on?
I don't have anything to base that
There,
on.
I
So
think
that's
that's your
why
answer. That's your answer. I don't have anything to base that on. Yes, a bad thing happened after the fact, but we didn't know that was going to happen at the time that we were originating the loan and deciding to disperse the loan.
And that the student was eligible.
Yes, the student had a right. So that's why I tell my colleagues, say, yes, we see that, but we cannot do anything else. We just had to do it, and then if it happened to him, it will happen, and then we will pay that.
The student is eligible for what they're eligible for. And then you can choose to do the professional judgment that we spoke about here, where you could choose not to originate based on exceptional circumstances on a case-by-case basis. And maybe this student had case-by-case basis, but the fact he was going to go to jail in the future wouldn't be one of them. We didn't know that at the time.
Thank you.
Actually, we had like a scenario like the one you showed us. The student actually, he didn't actually mention that he was not going to pay the loan, but we assume that because of his, I don't know, way of saying things. So can we refuse to give it the loan? Even if he didn't mention haha, I'm not gonna pay, but he didn't mention anything.
What did he
like that.
say?
Well, he was like, oh, it's a loan, but in the U.S., right? It's not going to affect me here in Mexico. So that's why we were like kind of shaky
I
about
wouldn't
it.
originate a loan for that individual.
So
But it's you're
so
the
we use a
professional,
PJ
not me.
for that.
Well, that would definitely be, PJ, I mean, there's no rule, so it's going to be a kind of professional judgment that you would choose to perform or not to perform.
So in that case, we refuse and just put it in writing and notify that.
Document and let the student know why you made the decision you made, and you're done.
Okay.
And there's nobody at the Department of Education that the student can appeal that PJ decision to. You
Good
say,
point.
they say, oh, I want to ask my regional office. I don't care.
But
The school made the
But if the
professional
student
judgment.
calls to the department and tell them that they're denying his rights and whatever,
No problem.
When the student calls the department, they're never going to tell us that they said those words that they said to you. So
Yes.
you have the complete story. We never get the complete story. The
Bingo.
student is going to tell us she wouldn't give me a loan, period. That will be the whole story we would hear. But you heard the comment that I'm interpreting. That's all it is. I don't know what he said. It sounds like he's just using similar words to, I'm not going to pay that.
And you can always ask more probing questions. You can always say, hey, are you telling me you're not going to pay that back?
Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm not telling you that.
What
Well,
does affect me in Mexico mean?
Yeah,
Ask them
you can
that. What
ask
do you
them
mean
that.
by that?
Open-ended
Get them to
questions.
elaborate. You know, set a few traps.
Yeah, exactly. Ask the questions. I mean, no, good point.
Those will come to us eventually in the team, and then we'll contact you, and then we'll ask you, so.
Okay, last question, so people can still catch shuttles. Okay, I see one more over there. You were quick raising your hand. I'll let you and then you. That's it. Well, I think we'll close it out so people can still catch buses.
The key word was documentation. We just found out that one of our students forged 5 separate different documents. Just about time before we decided to award. So what would have happened if we had awarded the loan and sometime later the department or some other organization would have found out that the documentation was forged?
Andy, do foreign schools refer to the Inspector General like domestic schools do? I mean, the Inspector General is the law enforcement wing of the Department of Education, and you would refer that student to intentionally attempting to defraud the United States government of federal funds. They are breaking the law. You would refer to the Inspector General. I don't know how to tell them, Andy, from a foreign school. Is it?
Well, as a matter of fact, I just have a card.
Great.
Oh,
I knew you would.
Santana
Read it.
from
Hold on.
OIG.
Read into the mic. Read into the mic. Use the mic.
While I was updating a presentation, I was sitting next to a woman named Jessie Santana who works for the OIG, and she used to prosecute.
Which is the Office of Inspector General.
Yeah, in the 90s, she was prosecuting students who were going to medical schools in the Caribbean but weren't actually there. They were just processing loans and getting checks. So she's happy to help in all fraud cases. So the problem is there's few of them and many of us, so they don't always, they're not always able to do what you'd like to do with cases. It depends on their workload and what the situation is, but we refer them.
But as far as what you can do right now, they came and got a loan for this year. Then you found out they forged the document. You know they forged the document. I'm not giving you loans next year. You're going to expel him. Done. Yeah, done. Okay, last question.
If you had dispersed those
Oh, sorry.
funds, I think that we would report the student
needs
to
to
the
report it.
Inspector General.
Yes.
But then I think we would contact the loan servicer
And-
to issue what's called a final demand letter. And the servicer would send the letter to the student saying the money that you just borrowed was borrowed under fraudulent circumstances and you must pay it back now in its entirety. Now, the money you
Yes.
you kept to offset charges, you would have to return that portion, but the portion you gave the student, it would be the student's obligation to send it back.
Correct.
Is there any kind of appeal that the student can do if he doesn't agree with our
No.
professional judgment?
There is no appeal that the student may say, hey, Department of Education, I didn't like their professional judgment decision. And because we weren't there, we don't have the documentation, we didn't experience in the narrative that you may have heard, you make the professional judgment decision, it's final.
I
Well,
think that wraps up
thank
our
you all so
Q&A.
much.
Remember, the buses go till 5:30. That's 16 more minutes. And thank you so much for coming to our professional judgment
Thank
session.
you, guys.
Thank you.